所以这个今天的这个时候呢，我们就下面我把这个宝贵的时间呢就交给Bryan.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. My name is Bryan Debates. I'm the Vice President of Education for the Space Foundation. Our world headquarters is in Colorado Springs, Colorado, USA. I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you about Mars. And so I might as well just go ahead and get started. So why is it important to explore Mars? For one thing, exploration is human nature. If you look back at the history of humanity, we have always been explorers. We always want to know what is out there. Anyway, exploration is in our nature. We've always wanted to explore, and Mars is the next logical destination for us since it is our closest neighbor. One of the things that exploring Mars will allow us to do is there are going to be a lot of commercial uses utilizing Mars, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. Another reason we want to explore Mars and get to the red planet is we want to expand into the solar system. And while it's a long ways away, eventually we are going to have to get off of this planet if humanity is to survive. And so to take that first step, we first want to go to the moon and then on to Mars. And of course, by exploring Mars, one of the big questions we always want to answer is, are we alone in the universe? You know, is there life out there somewhere? And by all indications, Mars, as you all probably know, was a very warm, wet world. It had oceans on it, and it did have the conditions for a very long time for life to develop there. And so it's going to be an easy destination for us to try to discover if there was ever life on Mars or in the universe besides us. There are two missions coming up. The European Space Agency has a rover that is going to go to Mars, and then NASA has a rover going there as well next year. And it is going to basically look for the building blocks of life to determine if Mars ever did have life in the past or does currently have life. And so there are a lot of important things for exploring Mars. And then, of course, not to mention, one of the benefits we have here on Earth is that we get to reap the benefits of the technology that is developed for space exploration. The things we use every day that we take for granted have come from the development of space. Things like GPS, computers. When considering when we're going to inhabit Mars, some of the industries that can be developed once we get there. Of course, the number one thing that is probably going to happen is mining Mars for its resources. So Mars has a lot of useful minerals, things like magnesium, aluminum, titanium, iron, chromium, are all minerals that can be utilized on Mars for further building of a habitat there, or a settlement there. Another big industry that is going to happen on Mars is tourism. Right now, Earth is getting ready to send tourists into space. We've already had tourists on the International Space Station. And there are plans, of course, as you know, to have companies like Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, taking tourists into suborbital flight and then returning them to Earth. Eventually, that is going to extend to space. Bigelow Aerospace is developing a space hotel where people will be able to launch up, stay in this hotel, and then come back to Earth. And eventually, that's going to expand to the moon, and of course, then on to Mars. And so, chances are the RFPs that you're going to be dealing with will more than likely have some component of tourism in it. Another type of industry that's going to be huge on Mars for the settlement there is going to be renewable energy. And we're going to have to develop some type of energy source to keep the inhabitants alive. And so things like solar energy, wind energy, nuclear energy, things that can be used as an energy source, we're going to have to consider. Obviously, wind and solar energy are going to be beneficial there, but once you start finding settlement, things like that, how effective will it be? Of course, solar energy won't be as effective on Mars as it is on Earth. And then another big industry that's going to happen on Mars is going to be construction. And as we develop the settlement and start growing that settlement, construction and the utilization of the resources on the planet are going to be critical. Now, looking at this at in a different perspective, I'm thinking about you as you go forward. If this is a career, this is an adventure that you want to participate in, these are some of the skills that we see cropping up in aerospace companies around the world. And if you are thinking about a career in the aerospace industry, these are the things, the skills that you're going to have to master. Obviously, you always hear about critical thinking, problem solving. Being creative is becoming a vital resource for leaders in this type of industry. And so don't be shy if you're that creative type. Sometimes the scientists and engineers need those creative people to help solve these extremely complex problems. Obviously, oral and written communication skills are always going to be vital. And what we're seeing now, and this is a perfect example of this, is virtual collaboration and being able to share ideas across long distances and cross-cultural competency. Learning to work with people from other countries is going to be critical going forward. One thing that Dr. Mao and Xiaoli wanted me to talk about was career directions in the aerospace industry. Again, talking about you and if you want to join this industry. And the interesting thing is, as I talk to the different leaders in the different companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, the one thing they say over and over is the most needed jobs that they foresee in the next 20 to 30 years haven't even been invented yet. So it's sometimes hard to identify what those career opportunities might be. And so the best thing to do is make yourself the best learner you can be and as adaptable as you can be. Learn many different certifications, many different skills, and that will help you going forward. As of right now, however, we can tell that these types of jobs and careers, these types of technologies are what's going to be critical for us to get onto the red planet. So technology is developed for the medical industry. Artificial intelligence is becoming a huge thing around the world. A very good friend of mine is the head of artificial intelligence for Elon Musk's Hyperloop project. And the things he has shared with me that aren't public knowledge yet, where artificial intelligence is going is incredible. And so that's something I think everyone should take a look at if it interests you. Advanced life support, realistically, we have the technology to get to Mars and live on Mars. The one thing we're not sure how to do is how to keep the humans alive once we get there. We are the weak link. We can send rovers, we can send robots, we can send habitats that function perfectly. We're still not sure how to keep the humans alive for that long duration of a mission. And so we're going to need technologies developed to help the humans stay alive. Obviously, communication is going to be a huge issue when dealing with going to Mars. Radio signal will take anywhere from 6 to 20 minutes just to get to Mars and then back, and that's traveling at the speed of light. So communication is going to be critical. Agriculture is going to be huge. I'll get to that in a little bit. Advanced materials, there are materials that need to be developed for Mars, for the habitats that are lightweight and strong. A lot of those materials haven't even been developed yet. And those materials have to be developed from the resources on Mars, because we can't take everything with us. And of course, robotics is going to be huge. It's going to be dangerous to explore Mars, so the more we can send robots out to scout before the humans go is going to be critical. And of course, advanced propulsion systems. Currently, it takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months to Mars, and it's just fortunately too slow. And so we need people to come up with the technologies that that will help us get to Mars faster. And so very quickly, I just want to go through some of the really interesting careers that are out there right now. Again, talking about you. And of course, if you want to be an astronaut, if that's what you want to do, you want to be one of the first people on Mars. If being trapped inside a small little area with 6 of your best friends for 2.5 years excites you, then you want to be an astronaut on Mars. Right now, like I said, it takes about 6 to 8 months to get to Mars. Once you're there, we're going to have to be on the surface for 18 months until Earth and Mars realign, and then another 6 to 8 months back. And so that round trip is going to be about 2.5 years. Some of the career options for an astronaut, you're going to have various specialties. You're going to have dual roles, triple roles when you explore Mars. And some of those roles, some of those careers that we are going to be sending to Mars that the astronauts need to fill. One is a geologist. And what's interesting about that, being a geologist may not sound real exciting, but by understanding geology, you can understand the history of a planet. And if we're going to Mars to look for resources and minerals, if we're going to go there to look for life, we have to understand the history of Mars through the rocks. We're going to have to understand the history of that location where we're at to find water, to find life, to find those minerals. And so a geologist is going to be critical. An astrobiologist, that's a person that searches for life and understands life on other planets. If we're going to look for life on Mars, we're going to need to send an astrobiologist. Of course, a medical doctor. Help isn't going to be right around the corner if someone gets sick or injured, and so a doctor is going to be critical for a mission to Mars. And then, of course, a botanist. And if you've seen the movie The Martian, we all know how critical Mark Watney's background was into his survival. And the thing with botany is it's going to be critical for the astronaut's survival. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. I talked a little bit about advanced life support and keeping humans alive. Things like we're going to have to provide food, water, air, etc. And everything in those systems needs to be a closed looped system, which means everything needs to be recycled. And so we still don't know how to do that here on Earth effectively. And so doing that on Mars is going to be even more critical and even tougher. Another thing that kind of plays into that is dealing with nanotechnology. And one of the things that's being tested now is injecting astronauts with tiny robots that will just float around inside the body in the bloodstream, and they will be programmed to seek out things like cancer cells, tumors, damaged red blood cells, cells that have been damaged by solar radiation. And at the microscopic level, they will repair those individual cells or kill those individual cells. And so to develop those kinds of technologies to keep the astronauts healthy and safe is going to be critical. And again, getting more into the medical side of going to Mars, one of the big things, the number one danger is solar radiation, cooking the astronauts, giving them cancer from the solar radiation, protecting them from that is critical. Another big problem is osteoporosis, or the loss of bone mass. We see that on the International Space Station right now. And the tests that have been done right now, for a human to go to Mars and come back, being in that type of microgravity environment, low gravity environment for 2.5 years, astronauts could lose as much as 40% of their bone mass. And it would be unfortunate if you were that person to be the first person to step on Mars, just like Neil Armstrong on the moon, and you step off the ladder and trip and fall and break your hip. Not a grand start to your adventure. And so keeping astronauts alive and safe is going to be critical. And of course, I mentioned artificial intelligence, having robots assist the astronauts with the captains, and then surgery. Right now, the gentleman that's working on the Hyperloop project is also working on robotic surgery and artificial intelligence. There is no way, if an astronaut gets injured on Mars, that doctors on Earth are going to be able to do surgery. The signal is too long. And the people on Mars, astronauts on Mars, may not have all the expertise needed to do a complicated surgery. And so Dr. Jose Morey is one of the people leading the artificial intelligence surgery skill, of where robots can go ahead and perform the surgeries. They can analyze a person's, let's say, heart or liver or lungs, and detect a tumor, analyze the tumor, and surgically remove something if it needs to be removed. Again, communications is going to be critical. That signal to Mars and back, there's just really no way of improving that speed. And so the effectiveness, being able to transmit large amounts of data, coming up with those technologies is going to be critical. Things to think about as you develop that base. Of course, engineer. There are all different kinds of engineers: electrical, aerospace, mechanical. All of those skills are going to be critical when establishing settlement on Mars. Of course, robotics. As I said earlier, robots are going to lead the charge in the exploration of Mars in tandem with astronauts. We will be able to send robots into caves, down canyons, where it's too dangerous for an astronaut to explore originally. Then, like I said, agriculture is going to be critical. There is no way we can take all of the food necessary to keep the astronauts alive, 7 astronauts alive for 2.5 years. And so we are going to need to grow our own food on the way to Mars, while we're on the surface, and on the way back. That's going to be critical for 2 things. One, like I said, the food, but the plants will also provide the necessary oxygen for the astronauts while we're there. And so the botanist is going to be, the people involved with that are going to be critical. If the plants die on Mars, the astronauts will die. And so those are the things that we need to think about with agriculture. Advanced materials. In your research for your RFP, I hope you investigate an organization in Hawaii called High Seas. They're doing some amazing things there, where they're using the volcanic rock on the islands of Hawaii and 3D printing structures. And that's one of the things we're going to have to do when we're on Mars. We won't be able to take all of the habitats necessary. We won't be able to send them from Earth to Mars. Eventually, we're going to have to utilize those resources there. And so coming up with those advanced materials where we can 3D print and make our own materials on Mars is going to be critical for our sustainability. If you are the type of person that likes to light things on fire and blow things up, I'm sure there's a few of you out there. We're always looking for ways to increase rocketry and rocket propellants. Like I said, it's difficult to get to Mars and explore the solar system. If we can shorten that trip to Mars from 6 to 9 months to just a couple of months, that gives us more time on the surface of Mars to explore. And so we're going to need people to develop those kinds of new rocket engines and chemical propellants. Of course, anything to do with computers is going to be critical. And some people laugh when they see this, but space fashion is actually a career in the aerospace industry. Companies like Virgin Galactic that will take tourists into space if you're going to be paying $1,000 US for a 6-minute or so of your interest, fashion designers in the world to design their spacesuits. And so, you know, that's something you can do. And of course, arts and music, if you're inclined to be involved in art and music, those types of things are critical in the space industry right now too. Anytime there's a mission that goes up, anytime you need to share ideas, you're going to share those ideas. And so those types of things are critical. So I just want to spend a few minutes that we have left just talking about living on Mars and what it's going to take. And things that you're going to have to consider when developing your settlement. Of course, the time, we talked about that. It's going to be about a 2.5-year round trip. And so that's something you have to keep in the back of your mind when developing your presentation. Again, life support, coming up with how your astronauts are going to get their food, how they're going to get their water, how they're going to get their air, the calculations needed to go to keep all of those people alive. And the one thing that I think is critical that you need to remember that I've seen students forget a lot is everything in your environment on Mars has to be a closed loop system. In other words, everything needs to be recycled. Okay, there aren't going to be any place to take trash. There's no way to take no place to take human waste. You know, what are you going to do with all of that? Energy, you have to consider energy. Solar energy, wind energy on Mars is a viable option. The wind does blow quite strongly on Mars, but there are some other factors you have to take into consideration with that. Of course, the next best possible energy source might be nuclear, but now you're putting a nuclear component on Mars, and is that safe for the environment? Again, food, water, air, radiation protection. And then one thing that people don't seem to remember is the psychological factors that go into what's going to happen to a human being if they're gone for that long, 2.5 years. No human being has ever been away from Earth where they can't see the planet. What is that going to do to a human when they can no longer see Earth? I suggest if you want to win this RFP, do consider some the psychological factors that happen to astronauts when the consideration into your proposal. And then finally, kind of preparing for the Future Space Scholars Meet. I know all of you know how to do research. I'm sure you've done a massive amounts in your schooling already. But a couple of things I've seen over the years that can be critical for you winning or losing this proposal. And the number one thing is, be careful of your sources, where you get your information. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people pull information off of Wikipedia. That's not a great resource for your facts. Double and triple check your facts. Just because you found some numbers that you think will work in your equations and calculations doesn't necessarily mean that those facts are correct. Use sites like NASA, the European Space Agency, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, CNSA. If you go to those government sources, those are the places that will have the correct facts for you to use in your calculations. So check those sites out before you go to other sites. If you have teachers and mentors working with you, please listen to their advice. They're there to help. I can tell you last year from the international finals we had an entire session on how to win and lose an RFP, and sure enough, most of the teams did exactly what we told them not to do, and they ended up losing the proposal. So when you have advice from the adults, and I know all of you are pretty sure you know everything, but please listen to the adults that give you advice. This is going to be a very short turnaround, and so pay attention to the details, but don't get so caught up in the details that of the calculations, for example, that you forget about the rest of your proposal. We saw that happen several times last year with teams where they got so caught up in the math of trying to solve specific problems, they forgot about the overall objective. So make sure you have someone on your team that is focused on that overall objective. Trust your team. This is a team event, and you have to trust that your teammates are going to do their very best to do their care of theirs. And then, of course, the most critical thing, and again, we saw this time and time again in the competition last year, especially at the international level, is the communication between teammates, and especially when it gets to the point where in the international competition you have different cultures and countries on your team, that communication between individuals is going to be critical. And so those are some things that I suggest that I've seen will help you win or lose that RFP. That's all I have right now for everyone, Dr. Mao. I'm open for some questions if we still have time.
Thank you. This is a very comprehensive presentation. Mr. Bryan shared with us with a lot of thoughts you may want to consider, and a lot of information you may want to apply when you design a Mars habitat. And moreover, we can see from this presentation that, you know, to design a Mars habitat, you may need information from almost every area, like agriculture, botany, medical, life support, chemistry, geology, or even artificial intelligence. So no matter in the future you want to be an engineer or a scientist, in which domain, you may learn a lot from this learning experience. So we still have some time. So please post your questions to Bryan, and you can either raise your hand or type it, you know, in the chat box. So let's begin.
I just one thing I had forgotten to mention: if we're dealing with Mars, two resources that would be critical in understanding the geology of Mars. Two resources that have done extensive research are the Jet Propulsion Laboratory from NASA, and then the U.S. Geological Survey have done a lot of work on the geology of Mars, and that's going to be critical to everyone's success for the RFP. So I just wanted to mention that.